So good morning, everybody. This is Jessica with the Community Foundation. Hope folks can hear me. Okay. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Perfect. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you all for coming this morning. I really appreciate folks being part of Meet Yourself virtually. And so I'm just gonna kind of kick things off, and then we'll move into what you're all really here for, which is some great speakers about mental and emotional health for children. So again, I'm Jessica with the Community Foundation of the New River Valley. We are one of the many partners that takes part in First Steps. And for those who may not be familiar with First Steps, this is a network of organizations and individuals that are focused on serving young children and families. And we started this work back in 2016, and through various partnerships and meetings with a variety of different providers, we've focused in on the three priorities that you see in front of you. Sharing information better with one another about what our services entail and how we might better work together to provide services. Speaking with a common voice about the importance of early childhood and early childhood providers, and then supporting and strengthening the early childhood education and development workforce. And we have working groups that work in each one of these areas, doing a variety of different events and activities. And these Meet Yourself sessions, as some who've attended these in-person sessions with us since 2018 will know, are associated with this information hub group and our desire to be able to share resources with one another. We have typically done these sessions in person, where we've had a chance not just to hear from speakers, but also to network with one another. But of course, there are some strange and different times. And so we are going virtual so that we can still provide some great information, share with one another what our experiences are and our expertise. And you'll see that this is the first of a series of sessions that we are holding in order just to provide information, particularly related to how we navigate COVID-19 together as a community. So we have three fantastic speakers lined up today who are going to be speaking on this topic of mental and emotional health for children. We'll start with Megan Pratt, who's a guidance counselor with Pulaski County High School. We'll then hear from Dr. Florence Mogan with NRV Pediatrics, and we'll finish out with Rebecca Moore with NRV Community Services, who's going to be talking in particular about the trauma that's related to this experience and how we can help support children during this time. A couple requests as we go through: if you would just mute your microphone when you're not speaking so we don't have background noise. We are recording this session and we'll post it to the First Steps website, which is part of the Community Foundation's page. So we want to make sure others can come and hear these great talks. And then also we're going to have questions in the chat box. Katie's being kind enough to kind of monitor that. And so after our speakers are done, she will ask the questions that you type into that chat. So if you just would, as you have questions that come up, thoughts or ideas to share, go ahead and put them in the chat. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy Gillespie, who's going to be our MC for the day, introducing our various speakers. And for our speakers, for those of you who may have slides, I have them all here in our presentation. If you would just kind of give me a quick nod as to when you want to move through the slides, just say, Jess, go ahead, and I will move us through. All right, Andy, I'm turning it over to you.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Jess. Thanks everyone for being here. We're really excited to kind of kick off this virtual Meet Yourself round. And of course, this is a topic near and dear to my heart, as I was in the field practicing this for a long time and have been colleagues with a lot of folks. So I'm really glad that we were able to bring these wonderful speakers here to kind of enlighten us on you know, something a lot of us are all seeing and work with every day, which is children and how they're facing COVID-19. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Megan Pratt, and she's a guidance counselor at Pulaski High School. And so if you want to just go ahead and as just said, please direct any questions through the chat box, and if you can mute just so that we can kind of cut out any background noise. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you all so much for having me. I am Megan Pratt. I am one of the school counselors at Pulaski County High School. So I do not work with the early childhood population, but I think, you know, when speaking with Katie, we talked about how some of the mental health needs are going to be the same and the challenges for families kind of across the board. My presentation today is going to be very informal and brief. Made some notes to just share with you what we're doing at the high school to try to meet our students' mental health, social, emotional needs, and academic needs during this very unique and unprecedented time. Um, so as we have developed a plan and redeveloped a plan and then modified it again because circumstances are ever evolving and changing, it does seem that connection is probably the most important in that sense of connection. So that has been what we have really strived to do, not just as a school counseling department, but as a school community. And I'm really just proud, I think, of those efforts that our administrators and our teachers and our staff and counselors have made during this time. You know, as you all know, we've never been through a pandemic before. So as we got started and problem solved how we were going to approach this, I said, well, we'll be good and ready for the next pandemic. Hopefully we won't have to face that. But as a school counseling department, we really felt the need and kind of the void in connecting with our students and decided we needed to move forward with developing a website, something that probably needed to have been done before now, but there never seems to be time to sit down and learn the technology, but we were forced or pressed into that to make sure we had a way to get information out consistently to our students. So that was one of the first steps that we took. I'll say our district in the last couple of years started moving towards increasing our technology accessibility for our students. And so we are very grateful and thankful that we were making strides in that area, and that has certainly provided the resources to help maintain and our connection with students during this time. So we developed a Google website, and thankfully, you know, Google has made their technology very user-friendly. So that came about pretty quickly. We included mental health resources for our families and students, specific COVID-19 resources, and then a lot of just business items that we still need to communicate with our students. So we have a calendar with upcoming events. We have a page for our senior resources, because as disappointed as we are for all students that we weren't able to finish the school year, we were certainly especially disappointed for our seniors. And so wanted to make sure that we were communicating with them the information they need to finish out the school year, to graduate, and then for those moving on to 2-year, 4-year colleges, have the resources at hand for that. And we had a lot of other information that we've included on the site. So, you know, a lot of our focus, especially in the beginning, was addressing the academic needs. How are we going to continue with learning? What was that going to look like? What were our expectations going to be? And how could we ensure that students could earn credit and then graduate? So a lot of planning went into developing our grading policy, assessing our students' academic status, and then phone calls. So I would say that probably has been one of what we've spent a lot of our time on as school counselors and teachers as well, is just contacting the students and families. So we started with those who were academically at risk of failing a course or not graduating, not earning the credit that they needed for their diploma, and started with those contacts, and then have moved into other contacts, teachers having difficulty contacting students. They would notify us, and so we would try to help facilitate that contact. Personally, or I mean, in a professional sense, sources that they needed. So we work closely with New River Valley Community Services, and a lot of our students see clinicians and counselors and psychiatrists through them. And so contact the providers, and we have a good flow of information and communication with those common. So I'll try turning off my video. That's probably better anyway, and see if that helps. And I see a message that says my internet connection is unstable. All right. Well, I'll power through and hope that it improves. So just I've found that through those conversations with students and with families, as you all can imagine, this has been a very difficult time. So some of the needs that we are seeing, we do see a rise in mental health concerns, reports of depression and anxiety, and we've lost the structure of school that I think a lot of students rely and depend upon. So that has played a role, I think, in the mental health needs of our students. So let's see. Some are just struggling with the remote and the virtual learning. Some of it is just navigating the technology, and some of it is it's just hard to be motivated to independently work on those assignments. And along that note, I've heard from a lot of parents that they are overwhelmed. Parents are still working, their children are at home 24/7. They're trying to facilitate learning, and they have probably multiple children at home, and so just that feeling of being overwhelmed, and then also trying to navigate their students' mental health needs. That has been a challenge. Our students are really experiencing the social isolation that has come with quarantine. And school was a source for their social activity, and so that has been a struggle for them as well. In the younger population, you don't see this, but our high school students are working a lot. They are considered essential employees, or they are employed at our grocery stores and our Walmart in those areas. And so, so many have said, well, I'm working a lot more hours now, and, trying to navigate that with the independent learning has been a challenge. And I think there's just a grief about what has been lost. We have so many school traditions and norms that students look forward to and count on as part of their school year. And school abruptly was closed and ended without any kind of closure, and all of our students have struggled with that, and especially our seniors. So we've taken some steps to try to maintain a sense of normalcy virtually in this time. We communicate with students, like I said, through phone calls, but we also utilize Facebook, and we have a remind system that we use to send out text messages to students and families and call outs and all of those things. But we're moving forward with our local scholarship application, which we've created a Google Classroom for our seniors to access. We're moving forward with our most valuable cougar voting, which if you're not from Pulaski County, you may not be familiar with, but it's huge. We have students that are nominated and identified as being nominated at the beginning of the school year. There's a lot of build up until the moment at the end of the school year where our most valuable cougar is announced. So we're moving forward with the voting and a plan to have some kind of ceremony, maybe even like a drive-in, you know, to recognize the awarding of the most valuable cougar. And we have, we're making strides on graduation. You know, we've set a date, which I think for our families is helpful. It gives a sense of, okay, there will be a graduation. There's something to plan for and look forward to. And now we just have to plan several different scenarios because we don't know what circumstances will be. So that is a challenge. You know, we plan for our normal graduation, which is probably optimistic, and then we have several other scenarios that will be dependent on social distancing requirements and restrictions, that kind of thing. And we're moving forward with scheduling classes for next year. We had finished most of our course registration before the closure, except with about 200 students, and we're a school of 1,200, so we've been reaching out. But I think in a sense too, that helps students look ahead and say, okay, they're planning for next school year. So it just, again, gives them some hope that we may be returning to some kind of normalcy in the fall. So I'm looking over my notes just to see kind of if I've hit on all of the points that I had wanted to. And I think for the most part that I have. So any questions? I'm looking in the chat box. So we
do have a question about availability of technology. Megan, so I know recently Roanoke County released a news article talking about their rates. So for Roanoke County, we're looking at 15% of children don't have access to adequate technology, and I would suspect that's higher in the NRV. So Megan, I don't know if you can speak to if we have those kinds of numbers. I think they discussed it at the last school board meeting, but I wasn't able to listen to the whole thing, so I don't know that I actually have an accurate count for Pulaski County, but you may have a better idea of that.
I don't have a number. I think they are working on getting that data, and they may already have it. I just haven't heard. But it is a challenge as far as accessibility. And I heard a story of a parent driving their high school student up to a school parking lot so they could access the school Wi-Fi to complete assignments or turn them in. I think that in the Google Classroom, they can download things and take them homework on it and go back and submit it. But, you know, they were driving to the high school. They have multiple younger children. They all have to sit and wait in the car, you know, as the student is doing what they need to finish up their work or to turn it in. So it's certainly a challenge. I would suspect that our percentage of students without accessibility is perhaps higher than in Roanoke County, just due to the rural nature of our county. And, you know, we have teachers that also struggle with accessibility. So that has been a challenge. You know, when we're having virtual meetings, you can see that some teachers are in their cars and they have gone somewhere where they can access stronger internet so they can participate. So it's certainly a challenge, and I think they're looking at, in the event that the school year looks different in the fall and we're going to be moving forward with some manner of virtual learning still, and how they can increase accessibility throughout the county. So I think that's certainly at the top of the priority list. Other questions? I would just say that contact is the most important. Teachers have been requested to make contact with every student that they teach. So for our high school teachers, you know, that's 100 students, or maybe less, maybe more, because we're on a block schedule. And they have done that, and you can, as I talk with students and families, well, I talked to, you know, Mr. So-and-so yesterday, or Mrs. You know, so-and-so last week, and so we can certainly see that that is happening. And parents have expressed, I think, just an appreciation of that and a comfort with that. So maintaining that connection and that level of support.
Thank you so much, Megan. Does anyone else have any other questions for Megan? I was trying to see the chat too, and I didn't happen to see any. I think it's incredible how the schools and the teachers and everyone has been working to respond to this and meet the needs of the students. And so I really appreciate you giving us kind of that insight into all the things you guys are doing. And I think you're doing an awesome job trying to tackle this, as is all these school systems. I was saying yesterday how much I don't envy you all in trying to figure out the graduation plans, because I can imagine that that is extremely daunting. And I think even though, yes, we technically are looking at earlier childhood stuff, I think, knowing how the school systems and the high schools are doing things is really important. A lot of these kids may have older siblings, things like that. And I think you bring up a lot of important pieces, that these kids are working a lot, and they are essential, and they're facing that as well as trying to do virtual learning and things like that. So just different factors that I think were really helpful to hear, that I appreciate you sharing with us this morning.
Hey, I have one more quick question that I just thought about. Sorry. So I know that certain counties are offering laptops. Megan, what's Pulaski County got as far as that's concerned? Do we have students that are issued laptops just across the board? And at what age does that start?
So a couple of years ago, we moved forward with issuing Chromebooks, and it started gradually at the high school level. We started with our current 9th and 10th graders, who are now 10th and 11th graders, and so our incoming freshmen this year were issued Chromebooks. So as far as our high school population, 9th, 10th, and 11th graders have Chromebooks. Unfortunately, seniors were not issued those Chromebooks, but next year, our entire high school population. I do not think that those Chromebooks have been issued to students at the lower levels yet, but I imagine that is a plan. I think it was in process anyway, especially with the new middle school, and will probably be accelerated just due to current circumstances as far as making that happen. But for our seniors who, I talked to a student last week, and he's in a dual enrollment course, and that's a whole nother ball game. We're working with the new Rivers grading policy, our grading policy, trying to make it all mesh in the best interest of our students. And he hasn't completed a whole lot. And part of that is he's working almost full time. Part of that is he doesn't have a laptop or a computer at home, so he was trying to do dual pre-calc on his phone. Well, I can't do dual pre-calc probably, with resources more than a phone, but so that was certainly a challenge. So I contacted our IT department and I said, hey, is there any way we can get a device to this student? And they responded, the next day, brought up a laptop and, signed it out, and he came and got it. So we're trying to navigate those individual issues as they come in.
And Sarah had asked about Wi-Fi devices, and I know that right now, I don't know of any counties that are actually issuing anything to bump up Wi-Fi. It's been a discussion in several counties. There's even been talk of things like driving a bus around that has a hotspot on it and things like that. So I know discussion. Okay, so Montgomery County has done some issuing of devices, it looks like. But across the board, as far as the region as a whole, I've heard a lot of discussion about a lot of great ideas. I have not heard a lot of implementation at this point, but I think that we'll expect to see probably, like Megan said, for laptop distribution or Chromebook distribution. I expect that over the next couple of months, we may see an accelerated implementation of plans. Okay, so Sarah just said that Montgomery County is buying 300 more for next year. The issue that we're seeing, I know at least for Pulaski County, I expect that you'd probably have similar issues in Floyd, is that there's not always a provider at all. So like my parents live in Draper, and they have one option for internet service. And it's not a dial-up, but it's not a quick moving, it's a limited access type setup. So even with things like, the buses going around, my cell phone doesn't work at my parents' house. And so even my hotspot on my cell phone doesn't work. So I suspect that there's going to be some creativity to internet access for a lot of our counties. It's going to have to go on over the next couple of months.
And I would say to that, with the, let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, so for students who do not have access, we do have a system to issue paper packets, which has been a logistical challenge, but we've made it happen. And, you know, early on we were delivering those packets, and then once restrictions were put into place, we have been mailing them to those students who do not have access. So not a perfect solution, but something in the meantime. And there is flexibility with our grading for our students. You know, we're operating at a level of grace. These are unique times. Families are facing unique challenges. And so ultimately, if students were passing before the closure and have made some kind of good faith effort, and that can look different across the board, then they will pass and get the credit for the course. Well, I have, oh, that's great. Yeah, and there are lots of different plans, and I think we'll see some more things put into place over the summer and planning just as we kind of recover from this semester and can really look ahead. So I appreciate your time today and for having me. I have another training at 10 o'clock, so I need to leave. But if you all have any questions or want to follow up, I'll type my email address in the chat box, and you're welcome to contact me.
Thank you so much, Megan. I really we appreciate your time again, and you know, best of luck as you guys are navigating this as well. So we appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you. You all take care.
You too. All right, so we'll move on to Dr. Florence Mogan, who is with NRV Pediatrics and has she's been a well-established and respected pediatrician here in the NRV, and who you know, that the practice, I know personally my children are a part of the practice, and so I think that's a lot of our clients, a lot of our own kids. And so she has a lot of experience in this field and working with folks and children who have, in addition, emotional and mental health issues. So we'll turn it over to Dr. Mogan.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me to participate. And I was asked to talk about how children respond behavior-wise, and how we as adults can respond to children during these times of crisis and during these very different times that children are experiencing right now, and the differences that all of us as adults are experiencing during this time of the COVID-19 crisis. And I don't have any slides. This is very informal, so if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Children, like adults, respond very differently during stress. So different children are going to respond in different ways. And so it's hard to just categorize the responses that kids have into one set kind of category. Some children respond in ways that we don't expect, certainly. So just like adults respond in ways that we don't expect. And a lot of those variations depend on the socioeconomic status of the children, their ages, and a lot of children's responses to the stress of the COVID-19 crisis depend on their adult caretakers and how the adult caretakers are responding. Other big factors are the disruption to their schedules, exposure to scary talk that they might hear, and then exposure to adults who are angry, scared themselves, or struggling with fear of losing a job, fear of food insecurity, or adults who are just angry in general with the situation, or who don't know how to handle the situation in general. So we see lots of different types of behaviors, from children who are withdrawn, to children who are angry themselves, to children who are acting out, or children who regress in their behaviors. So a wide variety of behaviors that we see as pediatricians and as adults who are caring for children. For example, I've seen lots of toileting regression during the last 6 weeks or so. Children who were previously toilet trained who all of a sudden are no longer toilet trained, lots of bedwetting issues, refusal to toilet inside and wanting to toilet outside instead of inside. So lots of toileting issues associated with this, and ultimately something that they have total control over that the adult doesn't have control over. Also a lot of regression toward bedtime. So lots of children who have refused to go to bed, crying about bed, refusing to sleep in their own beds. And so these are big changes that parents are experiencing. And obviously during this time of everybody already being stressed, these kinds of issues become even bigger issues. So those are things that people are dealing with and struggling with. And then children with special needs tend to have even more problems oftentimes with the schedule changes. So children who are used to going to school, children with special needs, with autism, with other developmental issues who are used to going to school, are used to having their schedule, having therapies, OT, PT, speech therapy, who are all of a sudden just at home all day and find their life upended, so to speak, or having real issues with acting out. I was just, before I got on this Zoom meeting, I was on a phone call with a mom who was just desperate because her almost 5-year-old who was doing beautifully in school is now not in school and is just basically out of control because he is pacing the floor all day because he can't go to school. And when they drive by the school, he cries because he wants to be in school. So lots of those, excuse me, lots of those kind of behaviors that we see in children that are not necessarily predictable and are handled differently depending on the child. Now, there are some kids who are happy to be out of school, certainly, and certainly that has changed. So some kids started out the first couple of weeks with being very happy to be out of school. This was like a great, big, huge, fun vacation, and now those kids are becoming bored and frustrated and unhappy about the situation. So you've sort of seen that. I've seen that kind of progression from kids who were happy to begin with and now not so happy. Kids who didn't like school to begin with, who were being bullied in school, or who were just unhappy about school in general, kind of have enjoyed this whole change in their lifestyle of being out of school. And then just touching on teenagers, even although we're really talking about younger kids, I have seen with teenagers sort of this whole big schedule disruption being an issue. They're sleeping late, staying up all night, playing lots of video games. As the first speaker mentioned, some of them are working more hours if they're older teenagers, but particularly the middle schoolers are tending to take this new freedom of not going to school and sleeping late, staying up all night, playing video games, finding that it's hard to get their schoolwork done, and then being very anxious. And I'm seeing more depression and anxiety around all of this, not so much related to the whole coronavirus or the COVID-19 crisis, but more related to their schedule disruption that they are experiencing. So these are some of the behaviors that I've seen and seeing it manifest in lots of different ways. So moving on, talking to kids during this crisis and how you talk to kids about the COVID-19 crisis, things that you can approach, how you can approach children certainly depends on their age. And but I think in general, there's certain sort of set ways that all children should be approached. I think, first of all, everybody as an adult talking to children, and as we talk to parents or to caretakers about how to approach children, I think the most important thing to talk about is being calm and reassuring, both in what you say and how you say it. If you're saying calm words, but you're obviously upset, then the child certainly feels that and doesn't feel calmed down by the words, no matter what the words are. And then I think as for parents and for adults who are working from home, I have seen that there's lots of stress with working from home, trying to do schoolwork, and it's oftentimes very hard to be present in talking to kids. There's lots of multitasking that has to go on as a working parent with young kids, but I think it's really important that we as adults really try to be present when talking to children, especially when we're talking to children about things they're worried about. And then other things to emphasize would be to avoid blaming others for this crisis, for the coronavirus crisis, and emphasize that viruses make people ill, not other people. I think it's very important to be aware of what children are hearing on TV, the radio, or other screens. Certainly children don't always understand what they hear. There's lots of information out there, and there's certainly lots of information overload. So I think we really need to, as adults and as people talking to adults, as to how to help them screen this information, emphasize the importance of screening as much of the information that's out there away from kids, so that they don't get this information overload. Certainly, even for us as adults, there's such an information overload, it can be very overwhelming. And I think it's very important to be honest, and always to approach kids at their level. And sometimes we think that as adults that we can't tell children the full story or what we know, and we have to be careful about how we tell children. But I think it's always important to be honest and to approach kids at a level at which they can understand and have the information that they want without giving them too much information. And then I think it's important, as it is for everybody, to teach kids how to be safe and how to be proactive with good hygiene, hand washing, etc. And I think this gives them a feeling of having some control over their lives and over the situation. And then reassuring kids that everyone is working hard to keep them safe. Sometimes it sounds like that there's sort of conflicting information out there, and as the adult caretakers of kids, we need to be reassuring that ultimately the goal is to keep everyone safe. And then we need to always listen, see if they have questions, find out what they're worried about. Some kids obviously worry just that if they get sick, does that mean they have COVID-19? And certainly most kids who have come into my office, we really haven't seen children in our offices with COVID-19. So most kids who get a sore throat and a runny nose and a cough do not have COVID-19. So reassuring them that getting ill does not mean they have the virus. And talking about what it means if they do get the virus, and reassuring them that most children who do get the virus fortunately don't get as sick as adults, and that they'll be okay, that children get over the virus without lots of complications. The other thing I've seen, especially for upper elementary kids, is that they really worry about their parents and what it would mean if their parent got sick. So I think it's important as caretakers to kind of have a plan, especially for caretakers who are essential workers, to have a plan and to talk about it with their kids, so that the children are not so stressed about what it means when their parent leaves for work, and the fear that mom or dad is not going to come home, and how what your plan is to take care of them. I think ultimately most kids just want to know that you're going to be okay, and that they're going to be taken care of. So does anybody have any questions before I had some other things to talk about as far as emotional health? Are there questions that, I'm trying to look at the chats. Were there any questions that anybody wanted to ask before I moved on?
We don't have any extra questions in the chat box. Denny Martin with the Virginia Foundation for Healthy Youth just shared that these resources that you have posted have also been provided with their families. This is a great list. I actually took a picture of it, so I'm going to put this into a flyer format for the teachers and my staff, and I'll post it on our First Steps file page as well. So any of y'all that are with First Steps, if you want to have this slide that's showing right now, I'll get that in a format that we can save in a document so that you guys can pull that, because these are some great resources. I know the PBS Kids and Sesame Street ones both we've used in the center already, and they are really good resources in talking with children and very relatable things. So thank you, Dr. Mogan, and you can keep moving. I don't think we have any questions at this point.
Okay, thank you. So just a few more points. I think it's important to always recognize children's feelings and not to put children down when they're afraid. I think all of us are very aware of that, but children have very valuable feelings, and we need to recognize those feelings, but then not to try to move on from and be reassuring, but then to move on and to not continue to just make those feelings, to let those feelings continue to be sort of an overwhelming kind of problem for them, to try to find ways to distract. As far as managing feelings and the feelings of separation, I think it's important to keep in touch with loved ones. I think it's really difficult for children who are used to seeing their grandparents on a regular basis, or to seeing older adults on a regular basis, to understand why that has all of a sudden changed, just like it's hard to understand why school is closed or why all of these things have changed. So trying to keep in touch with loved ones or grandparents or other folks that are important in their lives in whatever way that can be arranged, whether it's through FaceTimes or Google Chats or just phone calls, and to let them know that you are also keeping in touch with them and checking on them, so that they are reassured that grandparents are okay. And I touched on this, but for working parents, I think it's very important to be calm and reassuring to children about how you're staying safe as a parent, and how long you'll be gone, what to expect when you come home, just sort of talking about the new routine. For instance, for me, not that I have young children now, but wearing scrubs to work is something different for me, and coming to work in scrubs and changing when leaving work in different clothes, and you know, the different routine that I have. If I had younger children, I think that would be somewhat upsetting to them, to see me, you know, doing things differently than what they're used to. Explaining that when you first walk in the door, you're going to go take a shower, and that you're not going to hug them when you first walk in the door, whatever the new routine is. I think children need to understand that those routines are different, or have to change for safety reasons, and be reassuring that that's okay. And then I also think it's important to try to keep routines as much as you can. So children are very much routine oriented creatures. So they like to and need to have regular meal times, regular bedtimes, regular exercise. And schedules give everyone something to look forward to, just like, you know, having a vacation gives everyone something to look forward to. Schedules likewise give people something to look forward to. And just knowing your structure, knowing that you have a structure, knowing that your day has a routine so that you can know what to expect as a child, as an adult. I think that's important so that you don't sort of flounder and not know how you're supposed to carry out your day. Kids are used to getting up, going to school, coming home, having their routine, going to soccer, going to music lessons, going to dance, gymnastics. And when that changes, all of a sudden there's sort of this, what do I do? And a lot of times it's sort of, for a while, that kind of feeling of freedom. And then all of a sudden it's, you know, kind of a floundering feeling of what am I supposed to do all the time? And it's hard to get into a routine without direction from adults and sort of either a written down schedule or a clear schedule from the adult caretaker. And then finally, talking about how parents can discipline during this time. It's a struggle when everybody's at home and on top of each other. Parents are trying to work. Children are a little stir crazy. So using positive discipline is always the best. So redirecting bad behavior, reinforcing good behaviors, finding creative ways to play. Looking, you know, there's lots of resources on the internet, so trying to help parents find creative ideas for playtime, even if they're stuck in the house, building tents, you know, doing interesting things that they may not do on a regular time when you're at home, and then rewarding and using privileges in a constructive way to try to create that positive environment for kids. I think it's important to have a special time, if possible, with each child, even if it's just 5 minutes, so that each child in a family feels special. And then most importantly, I think it's important for caregivers and adults to take care of themselves. So taking time for themselves, again, even if it's just 5 minutes or 10 or 15 minutes to exercise or to find a way to care for parents themselves, or for parents to have some time together in some way, so that the burnout issue with parents doesn't occur. So that's sort of my feelings about things as far as behaviors and how to talk to kids. And I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.
We don't have any questions specific to you. Amy Jennings, you asked about how the community as a whole is addressing needs of children from birth to 5. So this is more of a question to the group as a whole. So we, as the NRV big picture, we do not have a collaborative resource list. So one of the things that First Steps is doing is that we're doing these Meet Yourself sessions where you're meeting those resources face to face. In addition, when we had the in-person sessions, everyone received a binder that had resource information for all of the participants and all the speakers who were willing to share. So those that have been attending these Meet Yourself sessions are receiving those resources. So basic info of phone numbers, names, some basic contact info, basic services provided. So there is a group that's in the process of creating an online resource for the NRV that would have services for all families. But that's it's a extensive, massive undertaking. So First Steps, that's really been our focus, is to ensure that our providers are meeting one another so that they have that more than just a piece of paper resource. They actually have a name and a face to go with the different companies and the different service providers, so that we are really creating relationships. And we have found an incredible increase. We will hopefully be able to do another information session sometime this year with actual data behind why First Steps was started and the progress it's made. But we've seen an incredible increase in our networking and our connections. So while no, we don't have a written resource guide that you can just pull up and say, oh, if I need services for food insecurity, here's a list of all of those in the NRV. That's kind of the type of thing we're working on, is building those resources and those connections so that you do have a starting point. Now, specific localities do have some of those. So certain counties like Giles, for instance, has a resource list. Montgomery County, excuse me, Chamber of Commerce has one on their website that has a resource list. So as different localities, they're working on that independently, but that's a goal of First Steps and Families First. Andy, did I say that correctly? Or First Families? That they're working on getting that together for NRV-wide resource. So it's in the process.
Yeah, it's definitely a goal, and you know, involves grants and things like that that kind of were put on hold due to COVID-19. So definitely something we wish we had, especially now, but you know, doing what we can. But are there any other questions for Dr. Mogan? I'm still not seeing any in the chat. Dr. Mogan, I can't thank you enough for all the information you shared as a mother to 2 young children. It's been extremely enlightening, and things I think we know and we've heard, but I think it's even, you know, at this time, just getting another refresher and just some more suggestions and things like that and reminders are extremely helpful. So I think I can speak on behalf of the group when I say thank you so much for bestowing all this information on us and kind of sharing with us what you're seeing. I think it's really helpful personally for us and also professionally in what we do for a lot of us. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. And now we will turn it over to Rebecca Moore. Rebecca is with NRVCS, and she's an integrated health liaison and trauma-informed trainer. I was getting it right, Rebecca, because I know how we have to get those titles. So my bad, but it's changed sometimes. So, you know, I'm trying. But without further ado, I'm going to send it over to Miss Rebecca.
Hey everyone, Dr. Mogan did a fantastic job of covering a lot of things. So you'll hear some similar things echoed. I'll try to keep it succinct, just being respectful of our time. So some of the stuff will be an echo of what Dr. Mogan said. Very validating to hear that we're all on the same page and in agreement of, you know, just about what we're seeing and how children and families as a whole are affected through this. So Jessica, if you want to go to my first slide, really where I kind of want to jump off with is coming from a trauma-informed perspective, which is something that we are really trying to push, not just through NRVCS, but also through the New River Valley as a whole, is that the pandemic really qualifies as a traumatic event and experience on a community level. And I think that's really important to be able to honor for all of us, because I think what we're finding is that adults, especially, who are sort of the foundation for our children, is that we get really frustrated with ourselves. Why am I reacting in a certain way? Why am I experiencing these emotions that I'm feeling? I should be doing this, or I should be reacting like this. And I think when we're able to really embrace the fact that this has been a traumatic experience, it really can sort of shift how we look at it, and it can shift how we expect ourselves to react, and it can really hopefully open the door for us to be more compassionate to ourselves, to our children, to our families, to our fellow community members, to our coworkers. You know, really the list kind of goes on. So just as a quick refresher, when we talk about trauma, what does that mean? It's an event and or a series of events that people or group of people experience that's either physically, emotionally harmful, and it has lasting long-term adverse effects on our functioning and well-being. So that could be mental, physical, social, emotional, spiritual. We also look at the fact that trauma is a loss of any of the following things that are listed underneath there. So boundaries, power and control, attachment, protection, safety, consistency, predictability. And I think we all are in agreement that when we look at those profound losses, we can check the boxes of several of those right now, because our ability to have predictability and consistency, gone. Our ability to feel in control of a lot of stuff, gone. Trust. Do we trust the information we're getting? Do we trust the people that we're getting information from? Do we feel safe? Are we able to create healthy boundaries? What are we creating boundaries with? So just knowing that this is traumatic, ergo there will be lasting effects for people, but there are things that we can do to mitigate those effects and to take care of ourselves, take care of our families, take care of our children, I think is a really important point. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
Sorry for a second, Rebecca, someone was trying to share their screen as well. So let me go ahead and
Do not worry.
do it for you. Okay.
Okay.
There we go.
Perfect. All right, so if you want to go to the next one. So Dr. Mogan did a really great job of going over the fact that, you know, we really have to consider a lot of things when we're talking about communication and we're talking about support for children. Big one is the age, developmental level of the child. Looking at what natural supports do families have right now? What natural supports do children have? Natural supports are the supports that we have that are not paid providers. So that is, you know, family members or friends or other community people that are there regardless of what's going on in people's lives. Do families have economic support right now? Do they have access to resources? Are they concerned about where their next meal is coming from or their ability to pay the bills? Coping styles prior to the pandemic, you know, how well equipped were people to cope with stressful events? How well equipped were children to cope with shifts and changes and stressful events in their lives? Or did they tend to have a more anxious personality? Because you can be guaranteed that right now you're going to see a much more exacerbated version of whatever was going on prior to this. Resiliency skills. What are those resiliency skills that they had in place? What do they currently have? What might they be lacking? This again is a time where you're going to see a shift where if there were gaps in resiliency skills, that's going to be more profound. If they had a lot of resiliency skills, you may see that this is not necessarily as stressful for them as it is for other children. Do they have any predispositions or previously diagnosed mental health issues? If so, there's a good likelihood that some of those are also exacerbated: depression, anxiety, any kind of oppositional behaviors, things like that. Because really, if you think about it, when we're struggling with things internally, the external behavior is the way that a lot of times children communicate, because they don't necessarily have the vocabulary. So if you see them sleeping a whole lot more or not being able to sleep, if you see behavioral outbursts that are going on, or like Dr. Mogan talked about, regressions in toileting, or typical self-care behaviors that they were once able to do that they no longer seem competent or able to do. Those are all ways that their behavior is communicating difficulty coping with what's going on. And then also just general access to resources. And Megan even talked about that, you know, with access to technology, with access to ways to communicate with teachers or family members or mental health support people or doctors or anybody else in the community. So those are just things to really kind of keep in mind as we're going through this process and looking at helping to support children and families right now. All right, next slide. Common trends, I'm going to go through this real quick because I think Dr. Mogan did a really nice job of really highlighting a lot of these, but across the board. And what I would say, the one thing I would add is that children are no different from adults. So if you can think about yourself and your friends and your peers and your coworkers and how they're responding and reacting to a lot of this, it is very much mirroring what our children are experiencing. It just may look a little different. So increased anxiety, increased fear, that can sometimes look very different. A lot of irritability, anger, tantrums, an increase in behavioral problems, confusion, not understanding things, difficulty verbalizing and maybe trying to really just assimilate and understand what's going on in their world, trouble with transitions, trouble learning and retaining new information. If you remember, the brain that's in trauma mode is not primed for new learning. Not to mention, they are not in their typical learning environments with their typical teachers and learning styles and supports. So if you feel like there's a lack of progress or parents are getting really frustrated, feeling like they're not retaining information, they're not learning this stuff, it's not necessarily a reflection on a parent's ability or inability to be able to introduce that new material. It may very literally be that they are just really having difficulty learning and retaining that new information. And then once again, like Dr. Mogan highlighted, which was great, changes in typical behavior, difficulty sleeping excessively, nightmares, toileting issues, difficulty eating more than usual, desire for more comfort, maybe an increase in isolation, increase in energy. Really, it could be anything. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, next. So how can we help? The three biggest things that I think are really helpful is transparency, resiliency, skill building, and self-care. So if you want to go to the next slide, we'll kind of touch a little bit on each of these. So what does transparency look like? And Dr. Mogan, once again, did a very nice job of really highlighting it needs to be age appropriate with children. So we really need to be looking at how we're having these conversations with children, but also recognize that even very little children are wanting to know what's happening. They're wanting to understand what's going on. Allow for questions. Sometimes as adults, when we get really scared, we don't want to talk about things. And so we're very quick to say, we're not talking about that. We're not having those kinds of questions. And oftentimes it's because we don't know the answers. And so that feels very uncomfortable because we want to be able to provide answers and be reassuring. So a couple things. It's okay to not have the answers, and it's okay when children ask questions to say, you know, that's a really good question. And I don't really have an answer for that. But I bet we could find somebody else who might be able to help us figure that out. That then communicates to children that no conversation's off the table and that it's okay not to know, but that you're going to work together to figure out the best answer that you can come up with. Creating space and time to really listen to fear and concerns, as Dr. Mogan highlighted, it's really important to be able to be present. And it's so hard right now. That is such a challenge for everyone because a lot of us are preoccupied, whether it's work, whether it's parenting, whether it's our own anxieties and fears about what's going on and not having the answers. And the constant change of we're doing things this way, now we're doing things that way, and really not feeling like as adults, we even have a stable platform. So it is really hard to have that presence of mind with our children. But if you can create a space for it, and maybe it's not when they immediately come to you and ask a question. So maybe it's, hey, that's a really good question. And I think it's really important that we have a conversation about that. So why don't we schedule a time today to sit and talk about that? Let's talk about it at this time. And then make sure you come back and talk about it at that time. That allows for an opportunity to circle the wagon, but also say, I have other things that need to get done. And then, like Dr. Mogan said, identify ways as a house that you're working to stay safe and take care of each other. Okay, next one, the resiliency skill building. So these are really helpful things that you can do with children. Just some easy ways to create resiliency skill building: create routines and predictability, have as much consistency as possible in the house when possible, identifying things that you can control versus things you can't. So it's that productive versus unproductive worry. I can't control that things are opening back up, but we can control what we're going to do to keep ourselves safe as a household. We can control who we're going to be around. We can control where we're going to go. Modeling behaviors for children. Teaching and communicating emotions, letting the kids know it's okay to have tough days, letting them know that it's important to reach out for support when you are having tough days, creating support systems, utilizing them, and then identifying roles and responsibilities in the home that help each other. And then the last one is self-care. So it's super important as caretakers that we're doing this and taking care of ourselves and modeling that for children, because if we're not able to operate from a full cup, we can't possibly be there to support the children. And then also teaching them, how do you also take care of yourself in an age-appropriate way? And so this is looking at awareness. How am I feeling today? What's going on with me? Am I feeling balanced in life? Am I making time to take care of myself and do things I enjoy, but also doing things that I have to do? Am I connecting with others? What does that connection look like? Create self-care centers in the house. Kids can create little boxes of like sensory items or things that they enjoy doing, or things that are that help them to feel soothing things. Encouraging time for play as well as time for work, modeling self-care, take breaks when needed, keep expectations reasonable. We are not super people. It's not all going to happen and it's not all going to be perfect. And then, as Dr. Mogan also said, monitor media exposure. So monitor it for the kids, also monitor it for yourself, because that's really helpful if you're feeling inundated with information. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's maybe one slide or we're done. Yep. And then when you're reaching out for help, you're not alone in this. There's a lot of resources available. This, of course, is not a completely comprehensive list, but this is a list of some different resources in the NRV that are available to families, available to children. And so if we can help connect families and children to resources, that's always helpful as well.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Does anyone have questions? I wasn't seeing any. I think it's also, and Rebecca, you might have some insight into this, is that, like you had mentioned, fears tend to increase, and it's not just necessarily potentially fears with COVID. It could be other kinds of fears that just seem to get exacerbated by this situation. Is that kind of what you guys are seeing too, just in general anxieties and fears?
Yep, absolutely. I think it's general anxieties and fears, and then I think it's new fears that people didn't even think to have. And so it's like,
Right.
Oh, now I need to be scared of this as well. So yeah, I think across the board. And I think, honestly, people were starting to get used to being home. And now there's a new transition to things slowly starting to open back up. And that is opening a floodgate of all new fears. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I noticed the chat box. So Jenny had asked, with groups who conduct home visits, are there greater concerns for abuse and neglect right now?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say as well. We are absolutely worried about that, and those rates increasing, stress levels increase. We know poverty levels can increase for people, and that's an additional stress, and we know that that has a trend. Rebecca, what else are you seeing?
I was going to say, we also know, and we already have data from 2020 about trends in opioid and drug use in general and overdoses. And that has skyrocketed throughout this time, which was something that was already kind of predicated and people were looking to have happen, because when you talk about typical coping mechanisms under stress, and if people were already struggling with addiction, that's absolutely something that's going to increase. Domestic violence, all of those. Unfortunately, all of those things are very likely to increase because you have people in very close quarters 24/7 with a lot of exacerbated stressors. And so that in and of itself can sort of be a cauldron for disaster.
Absolutely. And I think NRVCS, I think all the other community providers are pivoting and trying to respond to the needs of kids and families as much as they can. Us at NRV Cares, we're doing a open circle online support group. Begins today. It's via Zoom. You can contact Kelly Lichty for that. And if Kelly, you can put that stuff in the chat, that'd be great. And so we are trying to give resources to parents. Amy, you mentioned, have you created a module for parents or guardians to learn this information that you just shared? I know this presentation can be shared with parents. As Jess said, we're recording it. Please feel free to share that. But Rebecca, have you guys created anything specifically for parents in that way?
So I don't know if we've necessarily had any new groups. We've definitely looked at ways to transition the groups that we once had, like strengthening families and things like that, to online forums. We have a lot of telehealth that we're offering to people. And I think that right now, as services never stopped, they just sort of shifted. But I think that's something that we're looking at, is what are some additional things that we can put out there. We have had some podcasts that we've done talking about COVID-19 and trauma, and looking at just different trends in the mental health industry as resources, and people can go to the NRVCS webpage to access all of those. And just some basic informational links that people can go to access information for people.
Hey, it's Katie. So one of the things I also just recently saw in an article that I want to throw out there real quick, just because I think this group is a good place for it, is that there has, in a few of our localities, Roanoke County is one. I know there was some information for Wythe County, I believe. I don't think they had any numbers for the NRV region in particular, but they were actually seeing a decrease in calls related to domestic violence and child abuse. But there's a concern that it's not because there's less occurrences, that there are less people in the home to witness these things, or less people interacting with these children. So I think that's something too that we as providers need to be just almost even more on alert for, because we don't have that same level of access to these children's lives. Just being really aware of when we see those signs. So I think that's something else resource-wise that a lot of you already have the components for, but just reminding clients and reminding your workers, you know, what are those signs and what are some things you look for or kind of keep in mind in that virtual life we're living, that, you know, we're just not in the homes and not accessing these children as often, but we know the stressors are higher. So I think there's definitely some concern in the field of just how do we make sure that kids are safe if we don't see them or get to talk to them or get to see their bodies as often as we were before. So I think that's something just to be kind of cognizant of, that I saw, like I said, I read an article about it just last night, some concerns about those numbers dropping or the calls dropping, but we really don't think the numbers are dropping.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Katie.
I was
Yeah,
just
100%, Katie. We know all that. Actually, across the state, the numbers have dropped drastically. And we know it's not because the rates have decreased. It's just because mandated reporters aren't seeing kids as much. I think food for thought, like you said, is being aware of it for when we do go back to getting together, schools getting back in session, if there's, you know, sports teams, things like that. And us as providers, parents, caregivers, coaches, everyone being aware of this kind of stuff, that, you know, kids might start being, you know, checking in with kids. How was it? You know, how did everything go during that time, and being able to have those conversations so that we can help protect them. And then, of course, I think we all, a lot of us in the community are trying to pivot and provide supports for parents to help ensure we don't see increased rates. But that has been the kind of the question of how do we get this information to kids for support. And I think a lot of the schools are trying to reach out to some kids via, you know, through guidance stuff, through the Google Classrooms, things like that, to just kind of give them resources if needed. But it's tough because, you know, when you think about, you know, we thought about the food buses and getting information that way. Well, we don't know if the kids are going to, you know, get the bag, or if the parents do, or what. So it's definitely a hard, you know, thing to completely, I think, address. But I think as a community, we're definitely doing our best, you know, to do that. But I think absolutely being cognizant that these rates will increase, and that's definitely a fear of all of ours, for sure. I don't see any new chats. I appreciate everyone bearing with us with a little extra time. And Rebecca, thank you so much for your time and sharing, you know, what reinforcing a lot of what Dr. Mogan said, but also sharing some new insights that I think were really helpful. We do have two more upcoming sessions, and one, excuse me, sorry, I got my 2-year-old in here. Okay. Our next one is on May 27th, and we're going to be addressing the mental and emotional health for adults. And then the one after that will be June 10th, and we're going to be talking about providing services and communicating with clients remotely. And so we'll have speakers from each of those areas who are really working the first one with mental health and with adults in that field. And then on June 10th, we'll have speakers from different organizations who are providing services remotely, and how, you know, they've kind of had to pivot and how that's been successful and things that we've all learned from it. So you can visit that link to register, and we really hope to see more people there. And please pass this on if you felt this was helpful. Pass on this recorded session to others, and, you know, send the word out. We're just really trying to get some information out to everyone. Did anyone else want to add anything? All right, wonderful. So I will I'll go ahead and close us off for today. And thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And we hope that this was useful, and look forward to seeing you guys hopefully in 2 weeks. Thanks so much.